Hi, my name is Ron Rogers, and I've been asked by several of my followers to talk on the recent stance that ALPA, the Airline Pilots Association, has had coming out against cockpit video recorders. Well, this might seem like it's an evolution of technology. I remember reading accident reports back before they had any sort of data recorders. And a lot of it ended up being almost total speculation because they had no cockpit voice recorder, they had no data recorders, and the amount of information they had was very limited. And some of the accident reports just kind of come off and saying, well, this is our best guess. So we've had a lot of advancements, but let me talk a little bit about my background here in this whole thing. Now, I've got many decades of being ALPA safety work. I was primarily on the technical side, not the political side. I was on the technical side, and I was chairman of several national committees and involved in both ALPA and if ALPA work. And I've had training as an accident investigator. Fortunately, never had to use that skill, at least for my airline, which is quite good. Now, first of all, ALPA has two sides. It has the political side and has the technical side. But first and foremost, ALPA is a pilots union, and its job is to protect the pilots, their working conditions, their lifestyle, and just generally to come to their aid in any issue. And okay, we're going to talk about cockpit video recorders. Well, they consider it intrusive, and of course it is. One of the comments was, I don't want this to get out and to have everybody on national TV see me die and my family, and of course it'll be there forever the way things are. And you say, well, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, I'm not saying there would be issues with deep fakes and things like that, but what you see is not always what there is, and I think it's pretty reasonable to say there's a lot of things in video that really don't show the true picture and might even show an incorrect picture. But things have come a long ways, and I want to talk about a little bit about the history of cameras in aircraft cockpits. Now, if you go into the flight test realm, it's very common to have cameras in the cockpit to look and see what the flight crew is doing, and it also helps with the flight engineers in the back to see what's going on up front, and you can record it for any unusual situations, and often in flight tests there are unusual situations, so it's good to see what's going on. And of course, one comment is you got to address the fact that technology has changed over the years. In my short lifetime, I've seen it go from just, grainy black and white, multiple scan line type of video to extremely small cameras that are 4K HD. And I mean, I've got it on my phone, I've got the GoPro, and you get just an amazing quality of video now that can be recorded, and it also can be stored. So you might say, well, it is technically possible, isn't it, that you could have good video recorders in the cockpit. Now, of course, the history of flight test, and you can see it there. There's a picture of the external cameras on the 777, and this is all relayed back to the flight test engineers at their stations so they can monitor what's going on. And there's another picture of the flight test engineer station from a little bit farther back in the cabin. And this happens to be an Airbus configuration here. Now let's talk about some of the things that started. Before there were flight data recorders, trying to figure out what happened in an accident was extremely difficult. And of course, the flight data recorders and the cockpit voice recorders were mandated in 1967, and they have expanded a lot in their capabilities. Now, where do you want to spend money on these things? And that's one of the issues. Anytime you're going to put something like video recorders in, well, is that the best use of money? Well, maybe, maybe not. With the flight data recorder, it's always better to have more parameters. Now, on the flight test aircraft, I remember, I think it was on the B-1, we had like 25,000 parameters. We could measure the G on the wing all through the aircraft at all sorts of points. I mean, you don't need that for accident investigation. You use it for flight tests, but you can always use more parameters. And there's some other issues with these recorders, like when the electrical power stops, they stop. And another thing that could be important, and this has been suggested also, is that you could have the recorders actually ejected from the aircraft upon an accident. Now, this is a little more important if the aircraft crashes into the water, because the pinger works for about 2 weeks, and after that it goes dead. And they've successfully recovered these data recorders even after the pingers have gone dead, but it becomes much, much more of a difficult process. And if the recorder could actually be ejected and float to the surface, it would make finding it easier, because the pinger works better on the top of the water than underneath the water. So it would make finding it easier. So maybe that's a better way to spend money. And also having a battery source for the recorder. Now, this can be argued because they take a lot of their data off the data bus in the aircraft. And if you lose power, you lose that data bus. So you would have to make sure that you maintain parameters somehow, even with the loss of aircraft power. And of course, these flight data recorders have been invaluable in accident investigation, because you have an accident and the aircraft can virtually be shredded, and it can be extremely difficult to piece together what exactly happened. If you remember TWA 811, they had a 747, a huge reconstruction of that aircraft in a hangar. Now, cockpit voice recorders, those were really protested as an invasion of privacy when they first came out. But they have been invaluable in accident investigation. And I was asked to be, because I also had a background training in accident investigation, to be on standby to listen to the cockpit voice recorder if we'd had an accident. And that can be something very difficult to do, especially if you know the crew members. But it often is helpful to have a pilot listen to what pilots are saying to try to decode what's going on, because sometimes it can be very difficult to hear certain things and to understand what may or may not be being said. Now, as a second officer on the aircraft, you'd come in, or the co-pilot now, we don't have second officers anymore, you'd come in and you'd plug your headset in there, and you'd press the test function, and you'd talk into it, and you could hear that your voice comes back on the recording, and you did that little function. And to make crews feel better about this invasion of privacy, if you will, they had an erase function. All right, well, I don't remember a whole lot of captains after the flight really erasing the cockpit voice recorder. Some did, but I don't think people were too terribly worried about it. Now here on the TWA 841, okay, you get 2 hours of voice recording. Now, spend your money. Okay, have it a little bit longer of a recording, because when they got back down, the event had been overwritten because it was so far in the past. And there's been often a proposal for make these things longer. 2 hours is just kind of short, because we certainly have the technology now to record much lengthier times. They don't use the old antiquated systems that were available in 1967 anymore. They've got a lot of advancement, so they can do a lot better job in doing the recorders. Of course, in this instant, the captain came in and he erased the cockpit voice recorder, which said he did it as a habit, but the NTSB did not like that at all. That made, and I digress here a little bit, that made them feel that he was trying to cover something up, because the only thing that he would have actually been erasing was after the event, when the crew may have been talking about, well, what happened, and the NTSB suppose that they were getting their stories straight, that sort of thing. So it did not go over well. But of course, there are always uttered phrases when the crew knows they're going to die, and it's bad enough to see the transcript, but if these things get out, and audio as much as video. If those get out, and you know how the news sources are, they would love to play those over and over again. And it's an invasion of privacy. It's horrible for the families. But let's talk a little bit more about the history of some of these things. Now, airlines can have labor relations that aren't the best. We had a strike, and the company was doing things that were very punitive, and you give them a source like cockpit voice recorders or that, and you have to guard these things carefully because they could be used punitively against pilots, because you can discuss things like you can discuss the upcoming strike and things like that, and the company could use that against pilots. So this has to be very carefully guarded. And pilots, are very suspicious. We have a career that can end very abruptly. You fail a medical, you have a heart condition. It's better now than it was, but you can suddenly be out of a job. You have a bad check ride or so, and now all of a sudden, you're looking at being a shoe salesman if you don't have anything to fall back on. So it can be a tenuous career, and pilots legitimately are worried about protecting their career and anything that might go against that, which is why the politicians say, no, we don't like that. But like I said, the NTSB has been pushing this for a very long time. Now, another thing that came about in the 80s was FOQA, Flight Operations Quality Assurance, and people looked at this as being punitive. Basically, what it does is you do a data dump of the flight data stuff, and you can see trends that are developing, and sometimes it can be an operational incident, like they're keeping you very fast to the marker and people are having trouble slowing down. This wasn't an issue in the 27. You could hit the marker at 250 knots and easily slow down. But some of the modern aircraft, the ones that are a lot more slick, like most of the modern aircraft now, don't slow down quite as well. And if you got an issue where ATC is pushing, the airplanes fast to the marker and people are having trouble getting slowed down, it can show up like as flap overspeeds because they're trying to get the flaps out as soon as they can, and you get a little wind gust and you can get an overspeed. That's from somebody who's had that happen. But anyway, okay. So there are issues there that you can see trends, not necessarily seeing that some pilot is screwing up or pilots in general are screwing up. So it can aid. But I must say, I was getting my IOE, my initial operating experience on the Airbus, and although I had flown it in flight test and stuff, it's a little bit different flight operationally, and I'm coming in on a Flaps 3 landing at Denver, and I've got my line check airmen, they're line check pilots now, sitting over there in the left seat, and I made an arrival into Denver. Okay, I have to admit that it was a pretty firm landing, and we were concerned it might have been a hard landing, and I went down there and I showed him, well, there was a dirt mark on the strut, so I didn't compress it fully, so that must have meant I didn't have a hard landing. Well, he was on the FOQA committee, and because of that, and because I gave him permission, he could go in and actually pull that flight out and look and see that we had a 1.6 G landing. So it was a bit of an arrival. But generally, that data has been used basically to see trends and address issues. And I think that has worked out quite well, and I don't think anybody has a problem with that. And it's been kept de-identified, so nobody's been pulled into the flight office and lectured on anything. But let's talk about cameras in general. Okay, anybody who has seen these most god-awful artist renditions of courtroom scenes, not only do they not allow video in courtrooms, they don't allow even cameras. So, the question is, well, why do you won't be invasive in the courtroom? Do you want to have lawyers suing lawyers over things they do that you have video of? Another thing is operating rooms. You don't have cameras in operating rooms. Now, you can argue, especially when you're looking at this angle, that anything that goes on that you might bring up in a lawsuit would be difficult to see. I mean, you would have to really have good camera placement to see anything that was going on, and you'd have to have medical expertise. And is a doctor necessarily going to call out another doctor as messing up? So a lot of issues come about there, and you don't see cameras in operating rooms either. And there's a few times where you can say, hey, it would have been really useful to have video. But then again, there are other sources of this. When the German wings, flight 9525, the captain stepped out and the co-pilot decided he was going to kill himself and everybody else on the aircraft. And the cockpit doors used to be these little flimsy things that sometimes actually fell apart when you closed them on the 737-200 because of an escape panel that would fall apart. Now they are barriers, the Kevlar barriers since 9/11, and if you're locked out, you cannot get in the cockpit. And this co-pilot decided he was going to kill everybody, and they were able, of course, to determine what happened through a number of sources. A video recorder might have been helpful, possibly, but it wouldn't have added anything to the situation. Of course, then we have the Egypt Air 990, where the co-pilot decided to kill everybody on that aircraft. And I found a little interesting argument or comment was that it said that the co-pilot disconnected the autopilot in a mysterious fashion. Now, I always wondered how you could disconnect the autopilot in a mysterious fashion. So when this came out, I would mention to my co-pilots, I said, okay, we're coming into wherever we're coming into, and I said, it's all right if you disconnect the autopilot. In fact, I like you to hand fly. It's all right if you disconnect it, but do not disconnect it in a mysterious fashion. All right. Well, basically, what the guy did here is he pitched over pretty hard. They got 0G. They got low oil warnings because most airliners aren't equipped for inverted flight. And he shut off both engines, and that kills the power. So all the recording, the CVR and the data recorder died at that point. So, they kind of knew what was going on. They could put things together, but power source can be an important part of this whole thing on maintaining parameters. So is that a better place to put your money? It might be. And one other thing that might have helped with MH370, although there was data reporting. Now, the nice thing about the 777 is it's putting out a lot of data all the time. And it could be helpful in accident investigations if you actually transmitted the data off the aircraft. That way you wouldn't have to go looking for the black boxes that you may or may not find depending on the situation. But there's some parts of the world that just don't have good satellite coverage. And the thing there, it would have been helpful. They were getting data things. It's kind of funny, the data that the aircraft does spit out. I was flying, I think it was to Beijing one time, and I get a call from maintenance. They said, we've been watching your oil quantity on the number one engine there. It's been decreasing faster than we like to see. And I go, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't really noticed that, but there's somebody back in San Francisco maintenance who is watching the engine parameters on my flight and knows that if anything goes wrong, they can get a bit of a heads up, and he gave me a bit of a heads up on it, which was very nice. So in the end, is there any reason to put video cameras in the cockpit? Well, maybe. I think like Alpa says, I mean, the NTSB has been pushing this for 20 years, but their whole thing is to investigate accidents. So another tool is something they obviously would like, and you certainly can't fault them for that. But, it's another invasion of privacy. It could be totally misused because there are a lot of optical illusions. I think we're all familiar with those things. Things aren't always what they seem to be. It's hard to see, and you'd have to have all sorts of different camera angles and stuff like that. And I think, although I look at from the technical side, not the political side, although I really appreciate ALPA protecting my job, I got to say that. But from the technical side, I think they are correct in saying, the usefulness is questionable, and the where you could spend money better, I think is a very valid argument. But anyway, it probably won't hurt, but there's only limited funds to increase information that will help with accidents. And you go back 20 years, and the ability of video recorders when they first were asking for it were just horrible. The information they would have gotten when they first said this was necessary would have been really, really poor. So, yes, it's getting better. Someday, maybe it will get to the point where it might be, decent without question, but I still don't think we're that point. So, anyway, that's my 2 cents on the subject, being asked to comment. Thanks for watching. I hope you found it interesting and informative.